everybody. Hope you're having a great Wednesday. Are you like me where you almost forget what day it is? Because it feels like we're doing the same thing every day. Because we're not going anywhere. We're all stuck at home. So I get the feeling. It is Hurricane Week. We talked a little bit yesterday. We did some of the hurricane basics. We talked about how I love hurricanes. I hope you love hurricanes. And I hope you learn a lot about hurricanes. And today we're going to focus more on hurricanes in Georgia. So more specifically, why do we not see a lot of landfalling hurricanes in Georgia? How often do we see hurricanes make landfall in Georgia? And then we're going to talk about some of the threats here in Georgia. Although we don't see a lot of hurricanes or tropical storms actually make landfall on the Georgia coast, we actually get hit pretty hard during the hurricane season. Even in North Georgia, flooding going to be the biggest issue, but we have seen tropical storm force winds even in Atlanta. So it's not out of the question, which is why even here in North Georgia, we're not necessarily on the coast, but we track the hurricanes, we talk about the hurricanes, and we focus on the hurricanes. I do want to do a quick refresher. Yesterday, we learned about hurricane basics. So if you didn't catch yesterday's lesson, go back and watch it. You can do it on the app or on our CBS 46 website and check it out because it's everything you need to know about why hurricanes form when they do, what months they form where, why hurricane season is when it is, which is from June 1st to November 30th. And we talk about all kinds of fun things about hurricanes across the globe, including cyclones and typhoons. So if you didn't catch yesterday's lesson, then make sure you go back and watch it. So we're going to talk about hurricanes in Georgia. Hurricanes don't make landfall very often in Georgia at all. And a lot of it has to do with our shape, our size, and where we are located. So on the globe, if you have a globe, I feel like I use this globe more than I ever have before. So I hope you have a globe at home, but we're gonna go. So we're gonna find it and we're gonna go to the United States. So there's the United States. Hopefully you can see it. And I want you to notice a few things about where we are on the United States, okay? I'm gonna try to hold this closely. See if you can spot Georgia on the map. Do you see Georgia? Georgia is right here, right? There's Georgia. Okay, what are a couple things you notice about Georgia when you look at it on the map? What do you notice? You notice one of the things you'll notice, not a lot of coastline. You look at Florida, and Florida has a lot of coastline. Georgia only has about 100 miles of coastline. Another thing you notice when you look at the Georgia coast, it goes inward. So the hurricanes, when they come in, they're most attracted to pieces of land sticking out. So you'll notice South Florida gets hit a lot. The Carolina coast, how it sticks out, gets hit a lot. So those areas that tend to stick out are the ones that get hit the most. So those are just a couple of reasons. We're going to talk about more of them. But next time you get a globe or even a map, I think it's really good for you to kind of study the coastline and you'll start to notice things on your own. And I think really important to know geography as it is, not only here in the US, but around the world. So maybe this is the time to do it. You have a little more time since you're learning from home. During the summer months, start memorizing your states and your capitals and your cities. Maybe even start with Georgia. Memorize your counties. I think it's really important to know your counties, even for adults. If I gave you a map with all the counties, can you name all the counties? See if you can do it. Personally, as meteorologists, geography is super important to us for many reasons. First of all, you can study weather trends and understand weather trends like the mountains and the elevations and the coastlines. But every time we get a new job, I've been here in Atlanta now for 12 years, just about 12 years. So I haven't had to do it recently, but every time meteorologists move to a new city, they have to learn all about the geography and the mountains and the counties. So that would be a good project for you to learn, to memorize those counties. And then when we have severe weather, it would be really useful because when you see the map with the counties, you know exactly where the severe weather threat is. So I think all of that is super valuable information that you use more often than you think, and you don't really think about it until you have some downtime. So that can be a little project for you. So we're going to start our lesson. We're going to learn about Georgia's coast. We're going to learn about Georgia. We're going to learn about the last hurricane that has hit Georgia. Just to start off, I do want to tell you, again, we talked about Georgia doesn't see a lot of hurricanes making landfall very often because of the shape of the coast, because of the size of the coast. But the last hurricane we had in Georgia making direct landfall. Now that is the key you have to remember, making direct landfall, because we have a lot of hurricanes impacting Georgia. We just don't have a lot making landfall through Georgia. That was in 1979. It was Hurricane David made landfall near Savannah, Georgia. So 1979, that was 40 years ago since we've had a hurricane make landfall on the Georgia coast. We've had a lot of impacts since then, but again, the last hurricane to actually make landfall was Hurricane David in Savannah, 1979. So we are going to get this playing. We're going to have some fun. You're going to be an expert on Georgia hurricanes. By the time this lesson is over, you're going to know everything that you ever wanted to know about hurricanes in Georgia. So world of weather, hurricanes. So we talked a little bit about this. On this map, it's a little easier to see than on the globe. And that is, why is it hard for hurricanes to make landfall in Georgia? And again, notice the coastline. Notice the size of the coastline here in Georgia. It's very, very small. So that's one reason. And just to put a number on it, I'm a big numbers person. There's only about 100 miles of coastline on the Georgia coast. 100 miles of coastline. Compare that to the Florida coast, has 1,350 miles of coastline. So almost 14 times more coastline in Florida. So just by odds, with numbers alone, we're less likely to get a direct hit. Even the Carolina coast has 488 miles of coastline. So again, that's 5 times bigger than the Georgia coast. So just on numbers alone, that is a big reason why we don't get a direct hit from hurricanes. Now, another reason, again, we talked about it. I'm going to point, excuse my reach here. Hurricanes are attracted to land. So as they're moving west, they are attracted to landfall. So they're more attracted to these areas along the Carolina coast. They're more attracted to South Florida as they make landfall, as opposed to continuing straight, and making their landfall into Georgia. Another reason, we actually have a Bermuda high. And you've heard of the Bermuda high. The Bermuda high is over Bermuda. It's over here. And you have the clockwise flow around the Bermuda high. So it's churning in this direction. And with the Bermuda high, by the time it picks up these systems, it's already making it curve to the north. So that Bermuda high is automatically giving it that northern curve. So by the time it makes its way to the Georgia coast, it's already taking that northern trajectory. So that alone has it move closer to the North Carolina coast. So again, the curve of the coast is a big reason. And also the small coastline is a big reason why we don't see a lot of direct impacts here in Georgia. Keep in mind the highest storm surge and all the tornadoes. Basically, the worst part of the hurricane is the front right quadrant. And we're going to learn more about this as we head through the week. So as the storms curve around Georgia, we're usually on the weak side of the storm. So a lot of times these storms will impact the Carolina coast, and we'll actually have really beautiful weather on that front left side with lots of sunshine. So it really depends on exactly where it makes landfall. Usually the ones that make landfall along the Carolina coast, not going to affect us as much as those that make landfall along the Florida panhandle. And again, that's because we're going to be on that front right side if it makes landfall on the Florida panhandle, as opposed to the Georgia coast. We're in that trajectory there to get some of the worst effects, mainly some very heavy rainfall. We have had a couple historic hurricanes over the years. Hurricane Michael was a big one. It was a category 5 as it made landfall. And you can see where it made landfall. There's the eye of the hurricane as it moved over Georgia and made landfall right over the panhandle of Georgia. And Hurricane Michael entered Georgia by the Florida panhandle. So although it didn't make direct landfall over Georgia, it certainly had a huge impact on us. It did cause significant damage to metro Atlanta, very heavy rainfall associated with this system. That was really the biggest impact with Hurricane Michael. Again, it was a category 5 as it made landfall, but it was a category 3 as it moved through South Georgia. And that was the strongest hurricane to ever move through Georgia. So again, it didn't make landfall on the Georgia coast, but it was a very strong hurricane to move through Georgia. And by the time it made its way to South Georgia, we talked yesterday how these hurricanes weaken significantly as they move inland. So it was a 5 as it moved over Florida, and it weakened significantly. But even as it made its way to Southwest Georgia, it was a category 3 hurricane. That's a major hurricane in Southwest Georgia. And then it continued to weaken. Hurricane Irma, another historic hurricane for us. This was in 2017, was Hurricane Irma, and this was in September. And this hurricane also damaged parts of metro Atlanta. Again, It did not make landfall over the Georgia coast, but that doesn't matter. We're still going to see a lot of effects from these systems making their way into Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, or Florida. And with Hurricane Irma, this was the first time that we actually had a tropical storm warning in effect for Atlanta. So not even South Georgia, but Atlanta was under a tropical storm warning. We have never had that before. And that was in 2017. So that was less than 3 years ago. That may be one you remember. Again, it weakened as it moved through, but as it moved along the coast here, it was a tropical storm in southwest Georgia before it finally weakened. So we don't need it to make direct landfall on Georgia in order to impact us big time. Another memorable one, this was Hurricane Matthew. And Hurricane Matthew was a strong, very strong hurricane as well. In fact, it was a Category 5 as it made landfall. This is the one that went through the Caribbean islands. This was in 2016. And this one created a lot of damage over the Bahamas and the Virgin Islands. And it caused a lot of destruction. And this one skirted over the Georgia coast. So it didn't even make landfall over the Georgia coast. And honestly, didn't even make landfall. But it created really bad storm surge on the Georgia coast. So we had massive effects on the coast with this one, with storm surge, beach erosion, rip currents, rip tides. So again, this one didn't even make landfall, but it was a very strong hurricane just off the coast of Georgia. And certainly it was significant enough that it did create quite a bit of damage along the Georgia coast. We had a lot of evacuations for that one as well. This is a really interesting graphic because this tells us how susceptible we are to hurricanes. And again, you notice the curvature has a lot to do with it. But this tells you the average number of years between hurricanes making landfall between 50 miles. And remember, I told you hurricanes are attracted to land that sticks out. So notice the reds, those are the areas that see hurricanes most often, or at least see them see less time between hurricanes making landfall. Again, Louisiana, this area sticks out. And then you start looking at the Carolinas, it's right on the north end of the map. So areas that stick out are more prone to seeing hurricanes. Notice Georgia, a little less susceptible, even less so actually, is across far northeast Georgia. Again, this is a curve. So wherever you see a curve, hurricanes are less likely to hit. Look at this curve right here. The curve of Florida right in there as it goes inward. Anything that jets inward is less likely to see direct landfall from a hurricane. Again, Louisiana, notice how eastern Louisiana sticks out and how western Louisiana has more of an indentation. Those are the protected areas, or at least more protected. Again, can't rule it out, but we just don't see it as often. This is a major hurricane return period. So a major hurricane, again, a Category 3, 4, or 5 hurricane. A major hurricane is the most destructive of the hurricanes. Anything above a Category 3. And you see it's not very often here in Georgia and far north east Florida. We will see a major hurricane on average between 35 to 40 years between hurricanes. So we don't see it very often. Again, look who's most susceptible. The areas that stick out: South Florida, eastern Louisiana, the Carolina coastline. So those land masses that protrude are most likely to get hit. Those areas that are more indented are less likely to get hit. And again, you factor that, which is a huge issue or a huge factor compared to factor that in with the size of our coastline, the fact that it's so small. You see that it's just not as likely at all for us to get affected by hurricanes. And that's why the last hurricane we had was in 1979. Again, in Savannah, that was Hurricane David. And some of the worst damage we've had isn't even with Hurricane David. It's actually with hurricanes that made landfall right here on the coast of Florida. They come in on the coast and they jet through Georgia. And that's when we've seen some of the worst flooding. In fact, just off the top of my head here, in 2017, we talked about Hurricane Irma, damaged parts of metro Atlanta. And again, that one made landfall through Florida. Hurricane Opal entered Georgia by the Florida Panhandle. Again, moved in on the Panhandle, 1995. Lots of damage in North Georgia, even though that system made landfall in Florida. In 1994, Tropical Storm Alberto, a similar path. And that one actually stalled over Atlanta, caused major flooding in 1994. And again, that's when that moved in over the Florida Panhandle. So direct punch is very unusual to get a direct hit from a hurricane here in Georgia, but even the ones that make landfall here on the Georgia coastline can impact us greatly. The ones that move in from here can impact us as well, but just because we get hit more often in this area, it's more likely that we're going to get hurricanes impacting us that way and certainly creating flooding that way. So today's trivia question: what was the last hurricane to make landfall in Georgia? So we talked about Irma was in 2017, Opal was in 1995, Alberto 1994. So we've had a lot of storms impact us, but what was the last one that had a direct impact on the Georgia coastline? A direct impact, and that was Hurricane, do you know the answer? It was C, 1979. That was Hurricane David, and it made landfall in Savannah, Georgia. So that is our question for today. That is how Georgia is impacted. I'm going to look at your questions here. I have you up on Facebook. But the biggest thing to know is even though these systems don't make landfall on the Georgia coast, we are very susceptible to flooding and damage here in Georgia. North Georgia, the biggest impacts we see from hurricanes is flooding. And a lot of times these storms come in, they can produce severe weather. We've had tornadoes associated with hurricanes as they move inland, but flooding is the big threat, especially if they slow down. A lot of times they'll slow down over North Georgia and create a lot of flooding issues. So that is why here in Georgia, and specifically North Georgia, we focus on hurricanes so heavily because we are impacted greatly. They create a lot of flooding. They could create severe weather. And you've seen over the years, we've had a lot of impacts from these systems. So I'm going to go through, if you're asking a question about something we're going to cover tomorrow or the next day, because we're doing hurricanes all week, I may skip over it, but I'll tell you why. It's because we're covering it in the next couple of days. So Bob is asking about La Nina and El Nino. We are going to talk about that. That is a very good question and something people ask a lot of. Just a quick overview. El Nino, we have less hurricane activity. During a La Nina year, we have more hurricane activity, but I promise we're going to get to that. I know that's in the forefront of a lot of your minds. That's coming up in other lessons. Let's see. What is the strongest hurricane from Lucas? I love your name, Lucas, because my son's name is Lucas, to hit the United States. Luke, age 16. There's a lot of memorable hurricanes. Katrina was a big one that hit Louisiana. Hurricane Andrew was a major one for South Florida. Hurricane Matthew was one of the strongest hurricanes, if not the strongest hurricane ever. That was the one in 2016. So we've had a lot of incredibly strong hurricanes over the years, unfortunately. Let's see. Why do some hurricanes, seem just die? Okay, Nate asked, why do some hurricanes, potentially the most devastating, just die on the coastline? That's a great question. And that's something we actually covered yesterday. So if you'll go back and watch yesterday's lesson, I think it's going to explain a lot. But hurricanes need warm ocean water. They need that water. The warmer the water, the more energy these hurricanes have. It's like gas. It's like when you go to a gas station and you put gas in your car. That warm ocean water is gas for these hurricanes. It gives them the energy and the fuel they need. Or on a person, it's like eating food. We eat food and we get energy. Once the hurricane travels over land, it loses all its energy. So it's almost like the car runs out of gas and you're not putting more gas in the car, or you're not being fed anymore. You just you're done. And that's exactly what happens. It takes a while. It doesn't happen instantly, but the hurricane is no longer being fed. It's almost like a car that's no longer getting any gas, and it just starts to fizzle. And that's why they weaken so quickly as they move on land. They need that warm ocean water. Without it, they just fizzle. Let's see. I think that is all the questions. I'm seeing if I have anything else. I think that's everything. Guys, I hope you loved today's lesson. I hope, if anything, it's good water cooler topics. Next time, maybe you're at work, whenever we're back to work in a normal office setting, or kids, when you go back to school, and you can ask your friends, why do you think Georgia, or quiz your teachers, why does Georgia usually not get a direct hit from a hurricane? And it's really 3 reasons, but the 2 really I want you to remember are, it's the coastline. The coastline is very small compared to the Florida coastline or the Carolina coastline. That's one big reason. We only have 100 miles of coastline. Two, because we're indented, it's the shape of our coastline. Florida sticks out, Carolinas stick out as a hurricane's coming. It's more, it's easier to basically make landfall in those areas that stick out from the continent. And reason three is the Bermuda High. And again, that's because we have an area of high pressure over Bermuda, right over here. And you've got the clockwise motion goes around it. The winds go like this. So as it's going in this direction, as we have storms, it's almost pushing it north. So it's already usually making that northward turn, which is a lot of times as they're coming into Georgia, they take that turn and they hit the Carolinas instead. And again, much bigger coastline in the Carolinas that sticks out more in the Carolinas. So they are more susceptible to getting hit by hurricanes. Watch yesterday's lesson if you missed it. I promise you'll love it. Tomorrow we have another hurricane lesson. Let's see what tomorrow's lesson is. I believe it's on storm surge. Tomorrow is storm surge. So if you're interested in storm surge, what it means, how it happens, how high it can get, tune in tomorrow's World of Weather lesson. I hope you're loving learning about hurricanes as much as I am. Can you tell I'm excited about this topic? Definitely something that I hold near and dear to my heart. Hurricane season again starts June 1st, continues through the end of November, and that's when ocean temperatures are at their warmest for the oceans that impact our hurricanes, the Atlantic. So that is the Gulf of Mexico, the Caribbean, and the Atlantic Ocean. Everyone have a safe Wednesday. Go out and enjoy today. It was a little cold this morning, but it feels pretty fantastic right now. Lots of sunshine out there. Everyone, I'll see you tomorrow.